Here's a question for you. If this is called a function definition, this is called a function invocation. If this is called a component definition, what is this called? Here are some of the most common answers, all of which are incorrect. The primary reason for the confusion is because there's an important but subtle step between when React evaluates your code and the browser sees it. This makes sense. The browser can only understand JavaScript, and though JSX is a syntax extension to JavaScript, it's still not browser-compatible JavaScript. The problem isn't anything new. We've been compiling non-browser compatible syntax like Elm, TypeScript, and CoffeeScript to JavaScript for years. So how exactly do we go from this to JavaScript the browser can understand? The answer lies in what React calls an element. A React element is an object representation of a DOM node. This definition gives us some interesting insight into how React works under the hood. An element isn't a DOM node. Instead, it's an object representation of it. This React element being an object representation of a DOM node that looks like this. The way React works is it'll keep references to all of the elements in your application, and if one of those references changes, React will then know where exactly in the DOM it needs to update. In order to create a React element, you have a few options, one of them being React's JSX runtime package. This function takes in two arguments. The first is a tag name string like div or span, and the second is an object of attributes you want the element to have. In our case, a class name of header with the text profile as its contents. What it returns is a React element. Notice there's no JSX here. It's all just JavaScript. What's interesting about learning React is that typically one of the first things you're taught are components, and that components are the building blocks of React. But as we can see, that's not true. Elements are the true building blocks of React. Components, by definition, are just functions that optionally accept input via props and return a React element. And you're not only limited to creating React elements from native HTML elements like span and div. You can also pass in other React components as the first argument to the JSX function as well. When the JSX function sees that there's a component as the first argument, it will recursively render that component as well as all of its children components in order to get all of the React elements and the final description of the UI. Remember the badge component from the props lesson? Here's what it looks like using the JSX runtime package. So now the big question you're probably wondering, what's the difference between writing JSX and using the JSX transform? As far as the browser is concerned, nothing. As you can imagine, creating a description of your UI with JSX function invocations isn't terribly ergonomic, which is why we have JSX. At build time, all of the JSX in your application gets compiled to JavaScript via JSX invocations that the browser can understand. So now that we have a little bit more context, let's go back to our original question. If this is called a function definition, this is called a function invocation. If this is called a component definition, what is this called? We call it creating an element because after the JSX is compiled and the JSX function is invoked, that's what we get back, an element. In fact, all of these examples are showing different ways to create React elements, regardless of if we're using JSX or the JSX Transform API.